I did it again. You would think that I had rubbed butter on my hands the number of times that I've dropped this today. My Bible is open to Judges chapter 11. That's going to be our text this evening. Going to work our way through that chapter. I really wanted to do chapters 11 and 12, but I just didn't think that we're going to be able to make it through both, and so we've shrunk it down to chapter 11. We'll be here in just a moment. It's good that we get to be together this evening, that we get to worship our God with one another and to encourage each other and get into our God's Word together is such a good thing. But with that, we're going to get into our lesson here. We have some difficult terrain to walk through this evening for the information that is presented, and it's going to be it's pretty heavy, this chapter, and so we're going to approach it with the weight that it has. We get to start off in kind of some slightly easier territory as we open up in this story, though, and look at the first 11 verses. We're kind of, at least in some way, getting back onto a track of a judge is once more arising, like we have seen happen several times, and we are looking at the rise of Jephthah. And the story opens up and giving his history. If you look at these first 3 verses, now Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior, but he was the son of a prostitute. Gilead was the father of Jephthah. And Gilead's wife also bore him sons. And when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, "You shall not have an inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman." Then Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob, and worthless fellows collected around Jephthah and went out with him. And so as we step into the beginning of Jephthah's story, we learn that he is the son of a prostitute, the son of a harlot, and we're seeing kind of similarly, not exactly the same, we're seeing kind of similarly to some of the other stories that we've looked at with Gideon's children. And so we're starting off kind of similarly. Here's this one that he is the son of a different woman, and all of the other sons come together and say, "You're not getting any inheritance. None for you. You leave." They drive him out, and so he goes out and he leaves. They drive him away so that he will not receive any of their father's inheritance. But as we continue on in the story, we begin in verse 4. After a time, the Ammonites made war against Israel. And when the Ammonites made war against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to bring Jephthah from the land of Tob. And they said to Jephthah, "Come and be our leader, that we may fight against the Ammonites." Go to that opening statement in verse 1. Now Jephthah was a mighty warrior, and his brothers run him off so that he can't have any inheritance. War starts breaking out. And who do you want when war starts breaking out? A mighty warrior. The Ammonites start waging war against Israel, and they say, "Oh, we know a mighty warrior. If we can just go out and fetch Jephthah and get him to come and help us against the Ammonites in this war." And as we continue on in the story, Jephthah knows that's exactly what they're doing. Jephthah looks at them and recognizes, "You know I'm the one that you've shown your hatred toward, right? You know I'm the one that you've run out, but now that you need me, now that you're calling me back, I see that you need me. And so if I come back, and if the Lord gives me the victory, then instead of being run out, instead of not being a part of the peoples, I'm going to be the leader of the peoples. I am going to be the head. Let's see that happening in the text. But Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, did you not hate me and drive me out of my father's house? Why have you come to me now when you are in distress? And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, that is why we have turned to you now, that you may go with us and fight against the Ammonites and be our head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, if you bring me home again to fight against the Ammonites, and the Lord gives them over to me, I will be your head. And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, the Lord will be witness between us if we do not do as you say. So Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and leader over them. And Jephthah spoke all his words before the Lord at Mizpah. Jephthah said, you want me to be the head in the battle? The battle's over and the Lord's given them to me. I'm going to be the head after the battle. And they said, okay, we agree. It's interesting that they do readily recognize as, you know why we came out here. It's exactly what you just said. We came out here because we need your help. And so, since we need your help, we will submit ourselves to this that you have put upon us. We've spoken before the Lord. As you've said, as we've said, so it is going to be. And so in this we see the rise of Jephthah as he is going to become the judge here. As we step further into this story, we might expect, since he's going to be the judge, we have often seen war, we've often seen battles as a judge has arisen. We might expect Jephthah to go into battle and utterly defeat the Ammonites, but that's not what happens. There's some wisdom displayed in his trying to attempt some diplomacy with them, in his trying to reason with them about why they're waging war against the Israelites. So that carries us into verses 12 and 13. Then Jephthah sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites and said, what do you have against me that you have come to me to fight against my land? And the king of the Ammonites answered the messengers of Jephthah, because Israel, on coming up from Egypt, took away my land from Arnon to the Jabbok and to Jordan, and now therefore restore it peaceably. And so, in an attempt to be amicable, in an attempt to display diplomacy, he sends word to them. Why are you guys waging war against us? Why are you bringing yourselves against us in this way? And they say, because when you came into this land from Egypt, you took all of our land from us. And they give the areas in which their land had been taken. So they're saying, now you got to give it back. We want you to give it back peaceably. But if you don't, we're going to wage war. We're going to come and we are going to take our land back. And Jephthah's reply is really interesting. It's a rather lengthy reply that he gives to them. The brief of it is his telling them, that's just simply incorrect. We didn't come in from Egypt and just take your land. But he lays it out historically, bit by bit for them. He also offers some theological evidence to them that they had not just come in and taken their land. Let's take the first part of his argument, verses 14 through 22. Jephthah again sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites and said to him, thus says Jephthah, Israel did not take away the land of Moab or the land of the Ammonites. But when they came up from Egypt, Israel went through the wilderness to the Red Sea and came to Kadesh. Israel then sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, please let us pass through your land. But the king of Edom would not listen. And they also sent to the king of Moab, but he would not consent. So Israel remained at Kadesh. Then they journeyed through the wilderness and went around the land of Edom and the land of Moab and arrived on the east side of the land of Moab and camped on the other side of the Arnon. But they did not enter the territory of Moab, for the Arnon was the boundary of Moab. Israel then sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, king of Heshbon, and Israel said to him, "Please let us pass through your land to our country." But Sihon did not trust Israel to pass through his territory. So Sihon gathered all his people together and encamped at Jahaz and fought with Israel. And the Lord, the God of Israel, gave Sihon and all his people into the hand of Israel, and they defeated them. So Israel took possession of all the land of the Amorites who inhabited that country. And they took possession of all the territory of the Amorites from the Arnon to the Jabbok and from the wilderness to the Jordan. And so Jephthah says, "We were coming from Egypt, looking to travel through the country. We asked our kinsmen, the Edomites, if they would let us travel through. No, we're camping at Kadesh and looking to travel through the land of the Moabites, seeing if they would let us through. No, we come all the way around and we're staying in this place on the other side of the river, and we ask permission, can we please come through your land in this place?" And the king does not like that. King said, "We don't like all the Israelites out there. We're going to get our army and we're going to war against them. We're not going to let them come into our land and do this." It was not the the Israelites coming into the land and taking it. The Israelites are asking permission to go through the land, and they are attacked. And so going then to battle, they defeat those who attack them, and in defeating them, they won this land. You see that at the end, where the Lord gave this land to them in defeating their enemies, politically speaking, even historically speaking, they have won this land. They did not go into this land to merely take this land from them. They were asking permission to walk through the land, and they were attacked by the king. And as they have defeated the king, they have won this territory. But then he goes on to offer another reason to them, and he kind of segues from the Lord giving them the victory into this reason. But he introduces a theological thought to them that they would readily recognize. Verse 23. "So then, the Lord, the God of Israel, dispossessed the Amorites from before his people Israel. And are you to take possession of them? Will you not possess what Chemosh your God gives you to possess? And all that the Lord our God has dispossessed before us, we will possess." Let's think of this in terms of God. Here you are with your God, and you've been victorious in battle. You say your God has given you this victory. You say that your God has given you this land. Are you then arguing that if your God gives you the land, you're not going to take the land that your God has given to you? Our God, the God, has given us this land. He gave it to us in victory in battle. And so as he has given it to us, we're not going to turn that down. We're not going to say, "No, God, we don't want your gift." No, we're going to take possession of that which our God has given to us, even as you would do the very same thing. And so he makes the theological argument that God had given them the land, and he argues it from their perspective that they recognize, you're kind of right there. We would do the very same thing. But then he returns to another historical argument as we come into verse 25. "Now, are you any better than Balak the son of Zippor, king of Moab? Did he ever contend against Israel? Or did he ever go to war with them? While Israel lived in Heshbon and its villages, and Aroer and its villages, and in all the cities that are on the banks of the Arnon, 300 years, why did you not deliver them within that time?" Look at all of this time. No one's ever had a problem with it. Look at all of this time. The king of Moab never came against us and said, "You came in and you took that land from us. Now you give it back." All this time, you've never come in and said, "They took our land." All this time has passed, and now you seem to have this problem with it. Historically, you have recognized that there is no problem in our possession of this land. Therefore, verse 27, I therefore have not sinned against you, and you do me wrong by making war on me. The Lord, the judge, decide this day between the people of Israel and the people of Ammon. I've not wronged you, and you're bringing all of this against me, and so let the Lord make a judgment. Let the Lord make a judgment between us. And he's expressing his confidence in the Lord here. That's noteworthy when we get into the next section, which has some difficulty to it. As he's talking about the Lord making a judgment, he's expressing the Lord is going to make the judgment on our behalf. He is going to say, we are the possessors of the land. But he's still approaching them diplomatically, saying, look at all of these reasons that you're saying you're making war because we took your land, and that's simply not true. We didn't come in to take your land. War was brought against us, and we won, and the land was given to us, and you've never had a problem with it up to this point. We have not wronged you, so stop warring against us. But they don't listen. Verse 28. But the king of the Ammonites did not listen to the words of Jephthah that he sent to him. And so the king not listening, battle is being prepared for. They are getting ready to go into war. Diplomatic efforts have not helped in this situation. And so they're getting ready to go to war with the Ammonites, bringing us to the very difficult section of this writing, the vow that Jephthah takes. Let's look at verses 29 through 31. Then the Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and passed on to the Mizpah of Gilead. And from the Mizpah of Gilead he passed on to the Ammonites. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes out from the door of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. And so, verse 29, the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him, and he is being driven forth toward the Ammonites. Coming here, he makes this vow. If you give me the victory. Just coming off of verse 27, I think this is a strange statement. He was expressing confidence in verse 27. But now, verse 29 or verse 30, if you give this to me, well then, when I return home peaceably, when I return home victorious, the first thing to come out of my door to meet me, I'm going to offer that up as a burnt offering. We're going to be talking about a few things in what Jephthah says here, and even in Jephthah fulfilling what he says, what precisely it is that he has done. We're going to ask some questions here, and I hope to do so in a way that will not introduce confusion, and that regardless of the conclusion we come to, we're going to be able to take this and make application. But this really is a difficult section. There really is a lot of hardship that comes with what's going on inside of this section. Now, as I say that, I do have to tell you that I'm going to be making a few arguments from the Hebrew grammar. And as I tell you that, I do have to disclose I do not know anything about the Hebrew grammar. If it were Greek grammar, I can read about some of the things presented there, and I can kindly, knowledgeably talk about Greek grammar. I do know a little bit about that. I don't know anything about Hebrew grammar. I'm having to trust the word of Hebrew scholars who do know about Hebrew grammar as I'm making some of the points that I'm going to make. I do think that they are significant to trying to parse out what is happening inside of this text. And so as Jephthah makes this vow, I will offer the burnt offering. we have to ask the question, what is he saying that he is going to offer as burnt offering? What is he saying is going to be the subject of his burnt offering? I recognize inside the vow it's whatever comes out from his house first to meet him. But what precisely does he have in mind as he offers up this vow? There are several pieces of evidence that he's talking about a person. Not as I use that language, I don't mean that he has a particular person in mind. I just mean that he has people in mind in the making of this vow, not an animal. Typically, when we think about a burnt offering, we are thinking about an animal, but there are several things happening inside of this text that indicate he's not talking about an animal. He is talking about a person. Let's first note, and I'm going to bring all of them up actually. If he did have an animal in mind when he was saying, whatever comes out of my house, I will offer up as a burnt offering. And he is saying, whatever animal, he means the animal that comes out. Then we're going to get to this place in the story if you're not familiar with it. It's his daughter that comes out. Now, if he's thinking about an animal as he's making the vow, and I don't mean he's using tricky wording to get out of his vow. I mean, truly, he's thinking of an animal. Then, when it's not an animal that comes out to meet him, would he not be bound, or not bound rather, by this vow? Because he vowed an animal if that is what he is thinking of. But his daughter comes out and he says, I have to keep my vow. Getting to the grammatical argument, it's been noted that the Hebrew grammar indicates that he has a person in mind, not an animal. Again, relying upon the knowledge of others, it's said that if he had an animal in mind, most likely he would use the neuter tense, but instead he uses a particular tense of the infinitive. You don't have to know what any of those words mean, but it's said that because of the tense of the word that he uses, or the form rather of the word that he uses, it's indicative that he has a person in mind, not an animal. And most grammarians set that point forth rather strongly. It is strongly indicated that he has a person in mind in the making of this vow. Thirdly, he says, whatever comes out of his house to meet him. I know we have dogs that love us. But when you think of an animal coming out of your house to meet you, is it coming out of your house to meet you? Now, he doesn't say whatever he meets coming out of his house. This thing is coming out to meet him. Who is going to be coming out to meet him? An animal or a person coming out to meet him? And finally, if he did mean an animal as he's making the vow, and in the particular wording of the vow, even though he did mean an animal, he feels honor bound. I meant an animal, but I actually said whatever comes out of my house. So then I made that vow. That's the vow that I'm going to have to keep. You look in Leviticus 5, and you start in verse 4. And the Lord starts giving instruction on what to do when an oath is taken thoughtlessly. And there is a way to get out of a thoughtlessly spoken oath, that sin has to be confessed, an offering needs to be sacrificed for it. And so if he did have an animal in mind and it's his daughter that comes out, he said, oh, I worded that all wrong. I need to set this vow correctly. So as he makes the vow, the text seems to strongly indicate he doesn't have an animal in mind. He seems to be thinking of a person. And so with that, let's go ahead and continue on in the story. Just a very quick recap. I know we just came off of it, but he's come to this place and he says, if you give me the victory, Lord, whatever comes out of my house to meet me, it's yours, and I will offer it up as burnt offering to you. Then verses 32 and 33, he's given the victory. So Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites to fight against them, and the Lord gave them into his hand. And he struck them from Aroer to the neighborhood of Minnith, 20 cities, and as far as Abel Keramim with a great blow. So the Ammonites were subdued before the people of Israel. God gives him the victory. The victory that he asked for and said, if you give it to me, whatever comes out of my house to meet me, it's yours, and I'll give it to you as a burnt offering. And the Lord gives him the victory. And we move forward in the story, verse 34. Then Jephthah came to his home at Mizpah, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him with tambourines and with dances. She was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. And as soon as he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. You have become the cause of great trouble to me. For I have opened my mouth to the Lord and cannot take back my vow. He comes home and he has one child, this daughter, and she is the first to come out of his house to meet him. And you can tell he's not very happy to see her. You have brought me low. I have made a vow to the Lord, and I can't take it back. I have to keep the vow that I made. We're going to finish up the story as we see his completing his vow. But then we have to go through the great difficulty of talking about what it is precisely that he did and maybe work on making some application from that. But verse 36, and she said to him, My father, you have opened your mouth to the Lord. Do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth, now that the Lord has avenged you on your enemies, on the Ammonites. So she said to her father, Let this thing be done for me. Leave me alone 2 months, that I may go up and down on the mountains and weep for my virginity, I and my companions. So he said, Go. Then he sent her away for 2 months, and she departed, she and her companions, and wept for her virginity on the mountains. At the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow that she had made. She had never known a man, and it became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went year by year to lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite 4 days in the year. Tells his daughter, I made a vow, and I have to keep it. And she tells him, you keep your vow. Just grant me this. Let me go 2 months, and let me weep for my virginity. Then the next verse, this is going to become significant in just a moment. It says it again, that she goes and she weeps for her virginity. Then she comes back, and her father fulfills his vow. And then there is the reminder year by year of the sacrifice of Jephthah's daughter, leaving us with this final question. What did Jephthah do? What happened there? And you may say, Colton, we just read from the text. It's really clear what Jephthah did. He offered up his daughter as a burnt offering. And that is literally what the text says. And that may have been what Jephthah did. He may have literally sacrificed his daughter as a burnt offering. This is the literal reading of the text. I know I have literal up there twice. That's because we're going to be talking about a figurative thought here in just a moment. But I want you to know, if you sit down and you just read this text, that's what it says. There's no double meaning of any of these words that let us look at a second definition of the word, and we get to change what the text itself says. No, if you read it and you sit down and you define every single one of these words, the text sounds like exactly what we just laid forth. And so it may very well mean He literally sacrifices his daughter as a burnt offering. Now, if we take this reading, there are a few things we have to understand. There are a few things that we have to put forward in the happenings of the story. The first of which is the recognition with absolute certainty that such sacrifice would be wholly unpleasing to the Lord. The Lord does not look at this sacrifice and say, "Oh, you've given up such a great deal for me." This kind of sacrifice, wholly unpleasing, in fact, wholly displeasing to the Lord, if this is the sacrifice that Jephthah has made here. Look with me in Deuteronomy 18 and verse 10. There are actually a couple of different places that we could look. Thought that the wording of Deuteronomy would make the application easier for us to see. Look in Deuteronomy 18 and verse 10. There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination or tells fortunes or interprets omens, or a sorcerer. There shall not be among you anyone that burns his daughter as an offering. That is laid down in the law under which Jephthah is going to live. If this is the sacrifice that he has made, it is not a sacrifice that is pleasing to God. And if this is the case, there are a number of other things that we need to point out. One, as we just saw, he is acting entirely outside of the stated will that God has laid down. But secondly, we make this recognition about what Jephthah does in this text. He is treating the God as if he were one of the many pagan gods. Remember the state of Israel that we looked at back in chapter 10, and we pointed out, see that list getting longer? See them serving the gods of this land and those idols and that idols. It used to be one or two, but it takes a huge verse to start telling us all of the various idols that Israel is starting to serve. And if this is what Jephthah is doing here, he's treating the God quite similarly to the way that they would have treated their gods, which says, "Let me buy your favor. If you'll give me victory, look what I'll give to you. Whatever comes out of my door to meet me, I'm going to give that to you." You think about when Jesus is teaching about prayer in Matthew, where we looked at this in the Sermon on the Mount, and he talks about the heathens who think that they can heap up many words to God and all of these vain repetitions. And the point we brought out about that is they thought that if they could just beat down the ears of, or the doors of their God's ears, that their God will heed them and listen to them. And the same thing is going on here. That's the way the pagans treated their gods. If we can just offer just the right gift, maybe we can merit their favor and be given their gift. And if this is the literal reading of the text, it very much looks like that's what Jephthah is doing. He says, "Can I buy your favor, God? If you'll give me the victory, I will give you this sacrifice, because this kind of sacrifice is not pleasing to God." In fact, God has explicitly worded against it. And finally, if this is the reading of the text, maybe that's why the story ends in the way that it does. We're going to see another viewpoint here in just a moment. And that viewpoint is very quick to say, well, you'll see that Jephthah is never condemned. And since God is against this, that must mean that that's not what we are talking about here. But you'll also see that Jephthah is never praised either. Jephthah is never told, "You did such a good thing. And when you think about how this story should end, here is someone coming back victorious from battle. He's been given the victory. Shouldn't it be such a joyous ending? Shouldn't it be a great ending? And how does it end? Year by year, there's a remembering. Year by year, there is a mourning for the sacrifice that occurred. A story that should have ended in joy ends in mourning. Is Jephthah ever explicitly condemned in the text? He isn't, and I admit that. You can't read the text and come to any other conclusion. Is he ever praised in the text for doing the right thing? No, he isn't. And we can't read the text and come to any other conclusion. And so maybe as we look at a story that's supposed to end in joy that ends in mourning, we see that what was carried out here was improper, not right, against the word of God. There is, however, as I said a moment ago, another way to read what's going on here. Some have looked at this and they say not the literal offering up of his daughter as a burnt offering, but truly what he is offering up figuratively is his bloodline. That is what is being placed upon the altar. He is vowing his daughter's virginity. Let's notice, as we have said before, the language indicates he's talking about a person. That if he is talking about a person and literal sacrifice would have been displeasing to the Lord, then it seems that the story would follow differently if he is making a vow that goes against the will of the Lord. And so it seems that he would be vowing something differently upon this figurative burnt offering. As we think about this, and I emphasize this as we were going through the text for this very point, I think it is significant. It is said twice on the mourning of his daughter. What does she say she's going to mourn for? She says she is going to mourn for her virginity. What is she giving up? She's giving up carrying on the bloodline. She is giving up her family being carried forward. It is interesting. It doesn't say she mourns her life. I'm going to be put to death. I'm going to be sacrificed upon the altar. She goes and she mourns her virginity. Finally, I want to bring up verse 39 from the New American Standard Version. The way the ESV reads, it points more strongly to the first option that we brought up on the screen. But coming from the New American Standard, and once more reading behind those who know more about the Hebrew than I do, they seem to indicate that this is an accurate representation of what's going on in the Hebrew. Look at the verse there. At the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, who did according to the vow which he had made. And so he is completing his vow. He's doing what he said. Now, in connection to his completing his vow, what happens? And she had no relations with a man. He completes his vow, does what he said, and the end result is she has no relations with a man. Now, I will recognize in this, if she's put to death upon an altar, well, of course, she's not going to have any relationship with a man. That follows naturally. I understand that. But what is the emphasis upon in the completion of the vow? The ending of her life? Or in the completion of the vow, the ending of her bloodline? What does she mourn? She mourns her virginity. When the vow is completed, what is the result? She had no relations with a man. I do think that this is a valid reading of the text. Again, Let me say, you go through and you read this literally word for word, and you define every single word in it. The literal reading is, he offers her up as a burnt offering. There's some questions that come with that. This is a reading that does not go against the things presented to us in the scriptures. But I'll tell you, there's some questions that come with this as well. That there are difficult questions on both sides of these particular views. You could go back and forth, and I could spend another hour up here arguing with myself where one side has against the other, and I'm not going to do that. But I have two questions to bring up that I think are the most difficult questions to answer regarding each particular view. If he does intend this to be a literal sacrifice, and he promises, he vows, God, if you give me the victory, whatever comes out of my house to meet me is yours, and I'm going to offer it up as a burnt offering to you. Why does God give him the victory? That's a hard question. There's really a great struggle that comes with that, because the literal reading of the text is a burnt offering. And if that's what's set forward, then why does God give him the victory? And I think that that's a question to struggle with if we take this view of the text. I want to work a little bit more on that here in just a moment, but let's take the other view. There are some difficulties that come with that as well. If Jephthah has a figurative sacrifice in mind, Jephthah says, you give me the victory and I'm giving up my bloodline. You give me the victory and no descendants for me. And then he's surprised when he sees his daughter. Well, didn't he just vow to give up his bloodline? Isn't he expecting to see his daughter? Whose bloodline would he be vowing to give up if he were vowing to give up his bloodline? Because he's making a sacrifice, and if he's vowing to give up someone else's bloodline, there's not much of a sacrifice to that. So, I'm giving up someone else's bloodline. I vow that if I come across them, okay, perpetual virginity, no descendants for you. Sorry about it, I vowed it. But he was surprised to see his daughter. And if that's the vow that he was making, why was he surprised to see his daughter? Or surprised is maybe not the right word, but upset to see his daughter. He would be expecting to see his daughter. And because of that, that's why I take the literal reading of the text. I won't tell you one way or the other. I do think that both are a valid reading. And those who do take the view on vowing his bloodline there may have an answer to this question. But I can't come up with an answer that doesn't twist Scripture. He is low to see his daughter. Daughter, you have brought me low. And if that's the vow that he made, we wouldn't expect that reaction. However, in that first question, we ask, he vows literal sacrifice. Why does God give him the victory? I do not know if I can satisfactorily answer this question, and I hope that you're not sorry that I asked it. I hope that I'm not sorry that I asked it, but that is something that I have to struggle with as I think about the reading of this text. But as I work with this, let's point out what I said just a moment ago. God never once says, Jephthah, you're doing just the right thing. That which you are sacrificing, that's such a pleasing sacrifice to me. In fact, we know from Scripture that is not a pleasing sacrifice to God. Let's bring this into asking and looking at, thinking about, well, knowing that that's not a pleasing sacrifice to God, and it seems certain that God knows exactly who's going to be walking out of his door to meet him, does God giving him the victory put God's stamp of approval on what Jephthah has done? Well, we already know the answer to that question is Is no. Because God has already declared that's not a thing that is pleasing to God. So why does God give him the victory? As far as precisely answering that question, I can't. Because the text does not precisely answer the question, and I wish that it did. But I want to put this forward in thought. In God giving him the victory, if we can make connection back to a previous application that we made out of the book of Judges, as God gives him a good thing and says, now you go and you do something proper with this victory. You go and you do a good thing with this victory that I have given to you. And God still gives him a good thing. He doesn't say, don't take this victory and don't go and do what you said. God gives him a good thing. And in being given a good thing by God, Jephthah is to take this and do a proper thing with it. But Jephthah doesn't. He takes it and he misuses victory. Misuses what God has given to him. Allow me to make an illustration building upon the New Testament as we think about the love of our enemies. And God gives rain and sunshine to the just and unjust. Do you know what you can do with that rain and sunshine? You can do a good thing with that. You can grow plants for food so that your life is sustained and that you are carried forward. You know what else you can grow? You can grow drugs that are going to absolutely wreck your life. You can take the good gift of God and put that to a complete misuse. Now, has God given both the opportunity for victory? Has God given both a good gift? Has God given both this good thing? He has. Did both use it properly? They haven't. His giving him the victory is not God saying, oh, go ahead and you do that thing. It's God giving him a good thing. And Jephthah has to do with what God has given him the proper thing. And it doesn't appear that Jephthah does. And so from that, I do take the first reading, that is the literal reading of the text. There's a way to read it figuratively, but I don't know how to answer that second question. That if it's the figurative reading, you run into some problems there. Not to say you don't run into problems with the literal reading, but I can begin to wrap my mind around that. But as we take all of this together and begin working on just some very brief application, coming here from Jephthah and what he has done, let's notice that he speaks rashly. You notice I call this lesson Words Rashly Spoken. We know that he speaks rashly regardless of which view you take, because he's upset to see his daughter. He's not happy that he's made this vow. And we need to think through the words that we speak. We need to think through the setting forth of ourselves to a thing. Is it the right thing? Is it the appropriate thing to give ourselves to? And truly in thinking through that we recognize what we're bringing upon ourselves in the setting of ourselves to that course of action. But secondly, and I think that this is most important, when we've set ourselves on a course of action that we recognize, this is not going to leave me in a good place. And I do not mean not in a good place in the sense of I've got to make some personal self-sacrifice. I mean not in a good place in the sense that I'm not going to be living according to the will of my God. and we look at that course of action that we set ourselves on, we don't continue down that path. We don't continue down that way to that end. We stop and we say, I spoke rashly. I acted rashly and without thought. And now I've got to turn away from this course of action. I have to live differently. And I think that Jephthah teaches us that powerfully as we think about his story. And I do think that those points of application can be seen regardless of how you read what he did in particular. And so with that, we'll bring things to a close this evening. And we have to ask, what does your life look like? Are you walking with God? Are you walking down a course that is going to be pleasing to Him? Or have you acted rashly? Have you acted in a way that's turned you from His course and toward the way of the world? Well, turn from that. Turn toward our God, repent, give yourself over to His way, and you walk with Him. And if there is anything at all that we can do to help you with that, won't you come while we stand and sing the song selected?